Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to be talking about how field service management has evolved and what comes next. I'm excited to welcome today's guest, David Alazraki, who is partner in PwC's Field Service and Operations practice. David's expertise is in asset intensive industries. And we're going to have a chat about what he has seen in his time helping organizations with their field service management initiatives and also get his thoughts on what the future holds. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Before we get into it all, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, your background, the work you do at PwC, anything you would like to share.
Yeah. Well, David Alazraki, I lead the field service management capability for all asset intensive industries. That means mostly utilities, telco, oil and gas, and a few others. Um, I have three beautiful girls. I have one beautiful wife. There's a dog here that I share office space with. And I've been in this business of field service management for almost 20 years, hard to believe. So always new things, always a lot to learn.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, almost 20 years. So you have extensive experience in the space. And I remember you telling me that you got your start in software engineering. And you've, of course, helped companies from small companies to Fortune 500 companies look at how best to leverage technology to improve their businesses for, years. So as you reflect back on your own career journey and also, the way that you've seen technologies being used by these different industries. What has been most exciting in your mind about sort of the progression of digital transformation?
Yeah, I think there was a point in time 5, 6 years ago when I felt like um, this is quite an inflection point in our little niche world of field service management. And really seeing that now, kind of looking back, we've done a lot of analysis. I've done a lot of analysis around what happened, what is this disruption? And that disruption that again started 5 years ago, really driven by mergers, acquisitions of these legacy software tools, a lot of increased venture capital over the last few years pouring into this industry. And the result that we're seeing, and we're seeing it now, um, we call it the highly fragmented industry, right? There's so many different software vendors in the field service management space, but each one is really optimized for certain capabilities or certain slices of the overall problem. There's really no one solution that is widely implemented as the standard. And we spend a lot of time speaking with our customers, surveying the trends, even supporting field service management selections because everyone are coming to us with the same kind of question. Where do we go from here? There's so many options. We read the industry reports. It's all very confusing. Help us better understand where we should go. And what's interesting that while these are pretty much the same type of businesses, if we take a utility as an example, if you're a utility in Kentucky or Massachusetts or New York, it's the same business.
Hmm.
But yet the software selection process really results in different software platforms that they are choosing to invest in. So while the different results of the process, there are very common themes that are relevant for the entire industry. The first theme, and this is really amplified in the past few years, we see this industry, the field service management, becoming part of a full package solution, right? No longer these days of a software for EAM, a software for asset management, for work management, one for ERP, one for field service management. We're seeing this as a trend towards a single platform that really gives you that end-to-end experience, really connects the data seamlessly. In our practice, we call it the connected platform vision, right? It's all about connecting your work to the assets, to the customers, to the field, and really that full package solution supports that vision. So that was, the first theme we're seeing. The second theme is very much kind of on that same vein. It's all about end-to-end holistic view.
Hmm.
When we start projects, when we start engagements like this, yes, we're coming in as the field service management experts, but the first step is really just standardizing your whole operation. These businesses have so many different business units over so many different jurisdictions. Let's just sit down, take a step back, look at it holistically and understand where are the gaps. And when we do this, we get a lot of questions coming from our clients doing these strategic assessments. Should we start the field service management project before or after or during that transformation we're planning for the work and asset management? And that is, what I like about field service management, that's really important to understand. And that is true across all industries. Field service management is really, I would say, the downstream consumer of how work is initiated and planned in your backend system.
Hmm.
Right? We have this model we call IPSECA. IPSECA stands for I for initiate, P for plan, then scheduling, execute, complete, and analyze. And if we look at field service management, it's right in the middle of it.
Hmm.
That practically means that the way we're going to schedule work in our field service management solution is heavily influenced by that upstream decision of how we're going to initiate and plan these units of work. And that's going to heavily influence how we execute against those in the field, how we capture data against those and close the loop. So I'll say the theme here or the key call out is although this is only field service management, we have to look at it beyond the field service realm, really understand the end-to-end vision of the organization.
Hmm.
And I mentioned linear assets and or asset intensive industries. Most industries or classic service industries, um, they look at field service management as like a two-dimensional problem. I have the scheduling and optimization tool, and then I have the field mobility tool to capture data against that. When we talk about linear assets, there's a third dimension, a real need for geospatial capabilities,
Hmm.
right? These are linear assets that might be overhead, might be buried underground. And when we go out to the field and we execute work, we really need to know where these assets are located. This can be a pipe that was installed 30, 40 years ago, right? So we can talk about efficiencies all day long around how we schedule and optimize, but if we can't find the asset, and let alone meeting the safety and regulatory compliance that comes with that, then it's not going to be successful. So we're seeing really an increased demand for these geospatial abilities. And while traditionally in the past it was let's get our FSM tool and then let's get another tool for geospatial capabilities, now the demand really is to merge the two together,
Hmm.
having that one seamless experience that gives us everything we need in one platform, right? And it's beyond just seeing assets on a map or being able to visualize those on a map. What makes solutions great in that role is where we can actually, as a field worker, I can action against these assets. I can find that transformer when I do network tracing. I can find that asset and I can create new work against that. I can actually annotate on the map where I've installed the asset, where I relocated the assets.
Hmm.
Really, these are game changing for capabilities for linear assets. So I think these are the three kind of main themes we've seen over the years.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more investments coming towards these directions. That's great for everyone.
Okay. So let me go back to ask you a couple questions on this. So the first theme you spoke about is, the sort of full package solution. Now, I mean, I will speak from my certainly non-technical point of view, right? So I've been in this space from the perspective that I am, which is interviewing, service leaders about their objectives and efforts, et cetera, for I guess about 18 years. So not too far off, where you're coming from time frame wise. And, at the time, right, it was really a completely different world. If I think about the biggest shifts I've seen, one is that, at that point, it was earlier on, certainly in terms of digital transformation. So there were less organizations that had already gone digital. That was part of what was underway, right? But those earlier solutions were intended to be in place for 5, 10, 15, 20 years at a time, right? That's how they were built, that's how they were being leveraged. And that's one of the biggest shifts is that, you know, today, where we're at, where we've come in that digital journey, is to somewhere where companies just need far more flexibility and agility to adapt to, changing business processes, changing, business initiatives, different customer demands, et cetera. So to me, that's one of the biggest shifts. And I'm wondering how that correlates with this idea of a more, you know, full package solution versus what was maybe more of the norm then, which was
Yeah.
sort of like this compilation of, we have this core ERP platform, but now we're going to use this solution for FSM. Maybe we're using this solution for, a different aspect of that life cycle, et cetera. So how does sort of well, I guess not how, but do those two observations have a correlation? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, they definitely have a correlation, right? I think we're shifting from the days of monolithic solutions that you have planned to invest on for the next 20 years, because the pace of innovation is just too fast.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen cases where clients shifted towards a modern solution after 5 years even. And I would say typically the average now stands at around 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But from that monolithic solutions into full package solutions, these full package is also they're also bringing a different perspective. And that perspective, I have a book here, that is called The Light and Fast Organization. That is really where we're heading, a light and fast shift where these full package solutions are really almost fully baked. You
Mm-hmm.
need to do some tweaks, yeah, you need to do some configurations, but you don't need to heavily invest on those. These are no longer, multi-year engagements. These are very fast, lightweight, fast moving, and fast moving sometimes even too fast for the business. We're not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
We are definitely heading towards that direction in a few years.
Yeah. And I think it's important, David. I understand, like, we were chatting before we started recording, and you're like, so what are the questions? And I don't want to throw anything at you that you're not going to feel prepared to answer.
Please
So
do.
I'll just kind of reflect, right? So if we think about what that means, practically speaking, for organizations that have been, leveraging field service management through multiple iterations. So they've, maybe they did their initial digital transformation journey, like actually moved from manual to digital in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? And then they've been through some different iterations. There's this tendency to, and I honestly tie it in a way to ego, but it is also tied to the innovation from a technology standpoint. But the tendency was, if you were asking a business leader about their needs, there would always be an argument for why a solution had to be customized. And it was always because our business is so different. It's just truly unique. And it would not be possible for there to be a solution that could meet our needs without these heavy customizations.
Yeah.
And I had a really interesting conversation a couple of years ago with a CIO who was arguing the and interesting that it's a CIO, right? Because often the IT teams were sort of pro all of that customization, right? And sort of, doing those efforts. But basically, we had this interesting conversation about what role does ego play in this tendency to want to customize everything versus what level of that is actually necessary. Now, I would argue that the answer to that has fundamentally changed based on technological capabilities. So I'm
Yeah,
not disputing that piece. However, the pace at which change is happening today has also sort of forced a reconciliation, I guess, around what degree of customization makes business sense and, you know in doing that, sort of how much of it is or ever was actually a necessity, right? Because, you know that same degree of customization that 15 years ago we would have argued was absolutely crucial today will inevitably slow things down to a degree that can be really tough
yeah,
competitively. So what are your
yeah,
thoughts on that? Sorry, that was a lot
yeah.
there.
I think there's a lot there. Yeah, I think yeah, we moved from a world of you mentioned the CIO. I started a project 5, 8 years ago, meeting with the CIO, and the CIO say, "Well, good luck, guys. Let's make it great. Let's have fun. Let's give the business what they need. Absolutely no customizations. Period." And we all left the meeting saying, "Okay, let's." Let's see where this takes us, right? At the end of the day, you have some unique business needs, but the majority of it is not unique. And I'm hearing it a lot from our clients. Yeah, we do things in a certain way, it's very unique. It's not.
Hmm.
Some jurisdictions, some business units might be taking somewhat of a unique path. And that's back to the let's start with first alignment on the business processes and what are we doing? Let's standardize. Let's standardize not only within your organization, but what the industry standard is, what good looks like.
Hmm.
Um, and that alone really shifts us from the need to customize or convince the business why you shouldn't customize to let's just look at the standard.
Hmm.
I think in the past, and you're absolutely right. In the past, when we looked at customizations and these monolithic solutions, the word that comes to mind was risk. It's just
Hmm.
risky, and I'm gonna need to maintain it. I'm gonna need to upgrade it. It's not supported. And I think now, with this shift into these solutions that are far more flexible, I think the definition of customization is slightly less risky than what it was before. Because
Hmm.
now we have very clear boundaries of what we cannot or can do. Enhancements will always be part of these transformations. But there's always going to be pockets where we need to sit down and have a conversation. And I'll give you an example from a current client of ours. Um, we we address this as key decision. There's moments in the life cycle of a transformation like this where you say, all right, you need to acknowledge this is a key decision. And this
Hmm.
might be a key business decision or might be a key design decision. But it is important to pause and acknowledge that fact that this is a key decision.
Hmm.
And a key decision typically has more than one good option to implement that. And there are pros and cons, and there are no perfect solutions. If there were perfect solutions on a very clear path, then it's not a key decision. And our process is let's number one, acknowledge, let's document, let's put it in front of you, good, bad, or ugly. Let's put the options in front of you.
Hmm.
Let's have a conversation on what it means. Yes, some of those will be customizations, but you know what? If that means for a field worker to be able to collect all of the measurement points that they need to do as part of an inspection in a much more streamlined and simple way, I think we need to have a conversation. And ultimately, it's the decision, it's the business and IT decision whether we go that route or not. But it is our duty to raise that and have that honest conversation, even if it's a customization.
Hmm. I really like that point. I actually want to go back, David, because I realized, I was talking about instances where I think, there could be an aspect of ego in this, view of how unique the business truly is. But as we were talking through this, I'm also thinking about the differences from that time frame to today in the level of visibility and awareness organizations have into other organizations like their peers, right? There's also this idea of that perspective could be not rooted in ego, but just rooted in like you are within your business, you know it intimately, you know what the complexities are. You might just not realize because you're not interacting. And that's part of the value of firms like yours, right? Is to look
Yeah.
at this experience across similar organizations and be able to advise in saying, like, I understand why you would think that this requirement is unique, but actually it's fairly common, or it's this or it's that. So I just wanted to kind of say that. The thing I like about what you said, the sort of key decision concept, is that I think it is really important to highlight those when they come up and to understand what is a key decision and to your point, what really isn't. It might still be important, but it isn't necessarily as crucial because, you know, to your point, there's many different ways that you can go about this and still achieve success, right? But having clarity around really as a business, how are you going to measure? What does success look like, right? And that is really ultimately what informs those key decisions, right? So success 15 years ago may have looked in a way where having more siloed solutions that were more heavily customized helped businesses attain what success was then.
Yeah.
In today's landscape, the speed that is required has made it so that those criteria are different, right? You have to think about, okay, if we go this way with this decision, if things change, how quickly will we be able to adapt, right? Because that is just a very crucial success criteria in today's landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a gentleman, Mike Gosling, from Cubic Transportation Systems. I've interviewed him a number of times over the last few years, and they are a business whose one of their biggest customers in the UK is Transport for London, so the tube system, and they have, the way that the SLAs with Transport for London have evolved over the years is quite interesting. And I've talked with him about sort of their shift to outcomes-based service, et cetera. And so they are a company that leverages IFS planning and scheduling optimization to meet those outcomes-based needs. But
Yeah.
Mike was very wise in saying, you need to be very, very clear on what your success criteria are. And then you need to work toward achieving them before you start changing variables, right? So, like, you can't go down a path, switch it up, and then say, like, well, we didn't achieve what we wanted to, because you're not giving yourself time to achieve that initial
Yeah.
objective that you had. And I think, this idea that you're bringing up about when and where are these key decisions in any project? How are businesses aligning on what are the most important criteria and making those decisions thoughtfully and with a forward view is just really, really important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like all of these decisions has to be against an agreed upon set of guiding principles or a vision. And we keep coming back to that vision every single time and say, does it serve the vision? If it doesn't serve the vision, we shouldn't have the conversation against that. But the beautiful things about field service management, that's where rubber practically meets the road, right?
Mhm.
That's where you see the value. That's where you recognize value. And every time we go, when we have conversations with clients and say, I have a problem with this optimization engine, it doesn't work, it's not doing what I need. And I've spent a lot of time just helping clients understand what is going on because it is quite challenging to really understand what is the background of all of the noise that I'm dealing with
Hmm.
right now as an operations business. And we often go and we say, you know what, you have the right tool. You have the right
Hmm.
tool in place. This is not about the tool. You have issues with the data. This might be a change management issue. Back to the end-to-end, this is all a connected platform, and FSM is really kind of the downstream consumer. The problem is not in the optimization. The problem is up there in how you generate the work in the first place, right?
Hmm.
This whole vision of a connected platform of an end-to-end solution that really needs to tightly integrate. And when I say integrate, I don't mean in a technical way, but I mean in a business
Yeah.
business way. That is really what drives the most value when you come do a field service transformation. We always look at it holistic. You cannot just look at it from a field service perspective.
Yeah.
You just won't gain the value you are expecting from that investment.
Yeah, and what strikes me about what you're saying, if we're kind of looking back at like how things have evolved in the time that we've both been involved in the field service space. And what's interesting to me is how, we're talking in many ways about how siloed approaches to technology have sort of dissolved to an extent,
Yeah.
but also how that parallels how silos within the business also have or should be, right, dissolving, right? Because it's really focusing more on what the customer journey is. And so that holistic view becomes crucial, right? Because otherwise you could be having great success in one area, but it isn't translating to the next phase. Um, if it's okay with you, David, you threw out a couple terms that could easily be described as buzzwords. And I think it might be interesting to go back to those and kind of just talk a little bit about what they mean. Are they good or bad? And what people that are listening to this might want to think about in relation to these terms. So the first is you were talking about fragmentation. And
Yeah.
so I think this is interesting because so tell me when you think of the term fragmentation related to field service management, what comes to mind? Is it good or bad? And what do listeners need to understand about that term and how it would apply to them?
Yeah, fragmentation in that context is really about um, having multiple options out there in the market.
Hmm.
Multiple options. If 10 years ago we had two to three different software vendors that were cross industry, that they were good. See, I started my career implementing Click, a legacy solution these days. I can't believe we call it legacy, but it was pretty good. It was pretty
Hmm.
good. It was across industries. We implemented that from HVAC to home services to white goods delivery to utilities,
Hmm.
right? It wasn't perfect at all, but it was good enough for all of it. And there were two to three different solutions out there that really um, were widely implemented. But now there's so many different options. The standard is really high. Most solutions are pretty good at the core capabilities. When I
Hmm.
say fragmentation, I mean multiple options
Yeah.
implemented widely. I am right now, right this very week, helping a client that has a simple question, yet a very common one in the last few years. While we've made our investments from a technology standpoint on all of the ERPs and asset management and all that good stuff, specifically in this niche world of field service management, we have no idea where to go. Here are
Hmm.
the seven different options. I had one customer actually asking me for my opinion across 13 different options. Can
Hmm.
you help us understand what are the pros and cons? What is good? Where should we go from here? And ultimately, we're not the ones telling them what to do, right? That's their
Hmm.
decision. We're just helping them. We're guiding them with what we've seen in the industry, and basically also understanding what is it that they're looking for.
Hmm.
So, kind of back to your question, when I say fragmentation, I mean so many different options.
Hmm.
Um, is it good? Yeah, it's definitely good for a business, but also highly confusing
Yeah.
because you are putting investments for the next 10 years at minimum. And you're always, there was always the second guessing of did I make the right decision? And
Hmm.
that's what we're here to help with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a really good explanation. And I think for folks on the outside looking in, that level of choice is exciting because it's representative of the innovation that has taken place and what has become possible for companies to leverage, which is really cool. But you're absolutely right that from the business leader's perspective, it can be very overwhelming, the selection process. And we always have to keep in mind, right? Like these are people that are making a big decision, like you said, that's going to have a huge impact on not only their business, but whomever they serve over and their employees,
On the
over
personal
the
career path.
coming, yeah. But this also isn't their full-time job. Do you know what I mean? Like they're trying to make this big
Yeah.
decision and manage this big project on top
Yeah.
of their day-to-day role. The other term that I wanted to talk more about to understand better is consolidation. And I think we were talking about this in the context of that holistic view and sort of, what that means in terms of the ecosystem behind it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So on one hand, there's so many different options, and yet the industry is moving towards consolidation. Somewhat of a paradox, but that's what we have in our industry. That consolidation is all about, again, that one platform, that one solution. Instead of you having to go different vendors, deal with different vendors, build complicated integrations, build complicated processes to make it all work. That consolidation, in the eyes of the industry, is really all about simplifying. They're
Hmm.
simplifying and connecting the dots, connecting the data. And again, the key message and that we always go to our clients and say, it's not about field service management. It's not about just scheduling. It's not about just collecting data. It's about connecting your field to your work, to the assets, to the customers, right?
Hmm.
That is the vision. And that is for us consolidation. It's just bringing all of it under one platform is just big.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, there is this benefit of thinking about as the complexity that businesses have to manage has increased tremendously, in the past 5 years, 10 years. So this idea of that holistic view to the extent that it makes sense, right? Like you're eliminating potential failure points. You are improving data integrity, you're minimizing risk, and there's certainly benefits to that. I mean, um, I think what's interesting though is, the dichotomy of, like you said, fragmentation versus consolidation. And I think just the fact that those are both terms that came up in your three major trends kind of illustrates the level of confusion this can cause for people that are
Exactly.
actually, working to do it.
Exactly right. I think,
Um, yeah,
keep
go
going.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I think, that also you said a few things around the disruption of where this is heading. I think we're seeing more and more field service management, you know, taking a bigger role.
Hmm.
Yes, it's doing the classic aspects of scheduling and mobility. Um, but the pace of innovation, the pace of disruption, the pace that businesses needs to keep up with, it's quite significant. And one of the my favorite industries is utilities, no disrespect to anyone. I'm a third generation utility worker, so I have some respect there. But like the role of field service management in utilities is supporting what we now call grid modernization, getting
Hmm.
our future electric grid to the next level that it can support our electric vehicles, our two-way flow coming from my home solar panel, and the whole AI data center boom.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, field service is not going to solve all of it, but we're looking at it now from different lens. It's not just that solve these tactical problems of how do we schedule and enable mobility. I'm sure you've heard it multiple times in your podcast, the aging workforce,
Mm-hmm.
right? How many times you've heard that across industries? And if we go back to the utilities example, a recent PwC survey, up to 50% of the workforce is expected to retire in less than 10
Mm-hmm.
years. That is quite the inflection point, a demographic inflection point, if you will. And so that field service management solution now becomes somewhat the center point to digitize all this institutional knowledge, all this tribal
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, really redesign this whole experience because this new generation, they grew up with smartphones and iPads and they want a streamlined, super easy experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when I talk about FSM in these asset intensive industries, can't talk about mobile experience without talking about safety, without talking
Mm-hmm.
about compliance,
Yeah.
right? Highly regulated industries. Safety, back to that utilities experience. Being a lineman is a tough job. You're
Mm-hmm.
out there in this crazy storm, high voltage, you gotta restore power as quickly as possible, right? So how do we take it to the next level? Where do we bring that value in addition to just collecting data is you know, looking at this in a way that really enables us to put tools or data in front of the field worker to increase their safety, to
Mm-hmm.
reduce the regulatory exposure of that business. Um, so, people sometimes say it's just mobile phones. Why is it so complicated? Just take the phone and build it. But
Yeah.
no, we have to look at the whole impact for the organization.
Yeah. Those are really good points. I mean, the way that it intersects with the issue of the workforce and then also safety are those are huge points. The other one I was thinking of, as you were sharing those, thinking about like, all of the progression that I've seen in the time I've been doing this. The other big shift from the early days to now is that at one point, the idea of field service was pretty specifically tied to the idea of break fix in many instances, right? It was like you were saying, it's scheduling well to resolve problems when they occur. And for so many businesses, and I think we'll only see more of it, right? Service has become a opportunity for growth. It's become, you know, representative of a lot of potential within the business, but that changes both what we expect from employees and what we're trying to deliver to customers in a way that, like you said, sort of puts this idea of how we manage field service in the spotlight, right? Because we're not just talking about sort of a transactional experience. We're talking about the ways that, those interactions represent these bigger shifts. So
Yeah,
that's really
and and
interesting.
and us as customers, as the end customers, we are now used to a whole different level of service.
Mm-hmm.
Anything I want will come to my house in quick delivery within 2 days.
Yeah.
If there's a truck outside of a certain service provider, I want to go and ask him something or her,
Mm-hmm.
and that person is now the representation or the kind of the front man of that company,
Yeah.
and and whatever actions this person will take will determine if as a customer will continue that engagement with them. So I think our expectations as customers also impact that this decision or how we drive more value from this field service management solution.
Yeah. One of the things I've been trying to encourage through our content is to make sure that leaders are understanding the reality. They don't have to like it, but I'm just asking that they understand that there's a reality here that you know, though the way that our consumer lives have impacted what we expect from the experience of these industrial type businesses, I think
Hmm.
can feel very unfair to those organizations, unrealistic, unfair,
Very
right?
much.
And maybe so, but it is what it is, right? Like that is where we are. And so what I want people to think about is this reality that not too long ago, operational excellence was a competitive differentiator. The idea of just crushing your first time fix, doing a really good job at spare parts management, these things really could set a business apart from its competition that wasn't doing those things well. And we are at a point today that operational excellence is no longer a competitive differentiator. It is a basic expectation. And so that can be really hard, I think, to swallow because it means, you know, there's a number of businesses that haven't yet achieved that consistently or really well, right? And so then how do they get beyond, what that now represents? And I think that can be tough, but I think it's absolutely true.
Absolutely, absolutely. And our expectations are very much different. So, we can't have a podcast in 2026 and not say the two letters A and I
Mm,
together, right? But, you know, if we kind of talk about that in the context of what you just mentioned, I think I think that's the game changer of what's going to help these businesses
hmm
get to not only operational excellence, but also raise the bar on customer first approach without compromising. Because in the past, it was somewhat conflicting. And I had multiple conversations with service leaders where they said we are a customer first organization, but when we put it in test and gave them some scenarios, it was, well, it might be in your top three things you want to achieve, but the way you operate is very much operational
hmm
excellence within the organization. And by no means I'm saying you're doing anything wrong, but let's just acknowledge the fact that the customer does not see that.
Right.
It's not the perspective of the customer. And I think what we're getting now, or where we'll be heading in a few years, is that let's raise the bar with tools that gives us the ability to actually do that. And you know, uh, we get the questions a lot. Where is this heading with AI, right? And for me, AI is not about more automation or headcount efficiencies or creating 100% automated schedule that can go out to the field without human intervention. That's not it.
hmm
It's I think that brings AI brings the layer that, the word that comes to mind is resilience. It's like
hmm
ability to really tackle the difficult things that you need to deal with as an organization, as a service organization today. How do we react to weather volatility? I'm in Boston 3 weeks ago. There was quite the storm. It's spring now, in less than 3 weeks.
hmm
How do you breach that workforce skill gap we talked about?
Yeah.
How do you maintain the safety of your field workers? How do you support all of these demands that are coming towards you? So I see AI as an amplifier,
hmm
and that amplifier is going to drive operational excellence. It's going to drive customer satisfaction up.
Yeah. I agree fully. I think for field service, AI is what allows the interactions that are beyond transactional to be scalable, right? Because you have these constraints. They're real and they're only, businesses are only feeling more pressure around the workforce, not less, right? So AI can be such a crucial aspect of how you work smarter, how you can achieve more for your customers without the ability, even if you wanted to just add headcount, right? So I think the word you said is crucial for people to think about, which is to me, the biggest mistake I see businesses making today is thinking about AI as a path to efficiency, to shrinking or reducing versus the idea of amplification. It is
Exactly.
not about how can we cut, reduce, streamline, minimize. It's about how can we maximize what's possible? How can we amplify our capabilities? How can we scale the outcomes we want to provide to our customers in a way that would not be possible just based on manpower. And so I think to me, that makes it very exciting. But companies have to get that shift in thinking locked in. Otherwise, the way that it will be approached is going to exacerbate the issues with their workforce instead of helping to alleviate them.
I agree. And I have the luxury or the privilege to sit right in between working with our clients and then working with our software vendors. So I have the perspective of what the business wants to, what they need or what they
Hmm.
want from AI, and I have the pleasure to actually have conversations with field service management product companies on where is this heading,
Yeah.
right? And if I go back to that one word that comes to mind in the context of AI with the field service management providers, it's really that simplification.
Hmm.
A few years ago, I worked with a pretty large utility, multi-state, quite a large operation. Talk about operational excellence. That's like taking it to the next level.
Hmm.
And I was a solution architect. I spent time with a field supervisor that was assigned to the job. His name is Gary. Gary is still a friend of mine after all these years. And Gary and I locked ourselves in a room, and we tried to tackle this paper form that looks like these college um like these when you do a test in college and you can bring only one paper, both sides notes. That's
Hmm.
how it
Yeah.
was all over the place. And we spend so much time trying to structure that thing, but give it life.
Hmm.
And a lot of the work we did back then really now carries to this day, where we give it a structure, we give it a flow. We created what we call now as building blocks, like building
Hmm.
blocks of pieces of information that we can reuse across the business, back to the standardization process, right? So we spent so much time taking that unstructured format and giving it structure. And I think now back to AI. AI now acts as a bridge between the unstructured and the structured. We
Hmm.
can interact with an unstructured manner,
Yeah.
right? We're moving more towards a natural language interaction without forcing the field worker to go every field and capture the data in a very structured manner,
Hmm.
right? We spend so much time trying to fit each field in the right place, making sure it goes back to the back end in the right place. All of that simplified.
Hmm.
Future vision, I'm just gonna say whatever. It's like software development, right?
Hmm.
It's like I don't need to be a software developer, and I don't need to be a genius to capture all this information. I just type it in, and the magic happens behind the scenes. So, that for me is the future from a product standpoint,
Hmm.
blended with the fact that we can now understand and extract so much information from pictures and videos rather than just attaching it
Yeah.
next to all the data we captured. That will be the direction of travel for field service management down in a few years, not too far from today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really exciting. David, I wanted to ask you, we've obviously spent the bulk of our conversation talking about sort of the technological advancements and what that means to organizations that are looking at, what system to use or what that should represent for their businesses. But, you know, I think we both also know that in many ways, technology is actually the easy part. So, despite the fact that we've talked about some of the complexities, when it comes down to it,
Yeah.
there's aspects of transformation that are actually much more challenging. So, in the work you do with clients, when there is struggles with a project, what is the most common cause, or what is like one lesson that you've witnessed enough that you could, share with folks listening today?
Yeah, unfortunately, over the years, I was brought we as a team were brought to help with a challenged project that hit a certain wall, did not pass through basic testing. The business doesn't like it, and it's almost never about the technology. It's
Hmm.
just not. And I have my usual spiel that I say to every client: whatever you decide to go with, remember, in order to be successful implementing field service management, which is a niche capability, um, you have to really bring three different skills. Number one, the team you're bringing has to have deep understanding of that industry. If it's utilities, you got to understand utilities. If it's manufacturing, you need to understand manufacturing 100%.
Mm-hmm.
End-to-end processes like we talked about. Number two, you have to bring folks who understand what the field service domain is all about. What are the nuances? What does it mean to schedule and optimize? What does it mean to have trade-offs between operational excellence and customer first organization? And then the third one, which is probably the easiest to find, is bring a team who can technically be able to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And where we see projects struggling is they pick the right team who can deliver, but they don't understand the greater context of how this thing fits into the overall business.
Mm-hmm.
So these three skills, every time we helped a struggling client, it was very obvious. They were lacking one of the first two skills of industry expertise and domain expertise.
Mm-hmm. That's really good advice. Last question. I saw on LinkedIn that you are an endurance athlete and you run 24-hour adventure races. This is something that I cannot even comprehend, but incredible. So kudos. What, I'm not going to ask you what would motivate you to do such a crazy thing. What does that experience relate? How does that relate back to the work that you do?
It's a great question. Um, I had a LinkedIn post once when kind of I hit a big milestone in PwC and made it partner where in my little brain it all connects. It's all with one big connected platform, right? For me, endurance is a way of living. It's about resilience. It's about having the right strategy. Talk about 24 hours. You can plan all along, but when you start that at hour six, or when you get to 2 a.m., you got to learn how to adapt, how to
Mm-hmm.
adjust, how to literally read the map because we navigate map and compass. So really, you need to read the map. You need to understand the landscape. And I always felt that this is the biggest challenge. It's
Mm-hmm.
back to the previous point. It's not about the technology. It's really about being able to read the map, understand the challenges, understand these key moments of key decisions where literally one way or another, whether you go right or whether you go left, that's gonna make an impact on your race. So for me, these two were always very much intertwined and kind of part of who I am.
Yeah. There has to be something in there too about mindset, and this idea of when you get weary or when you inevitably come across a challenge or a disruption in your plan or your strategy, what clicks in your mind to keep yourself focused, to keep yourself in a positive space and moving forward. That seems like also a very important skill in either situation.
Pretty much, yes. You
Yeah.
go through a lot of emotions in 24 hours, and you go through a lot of emotions in a long project. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I can see the parallels. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much. Thank you,
Of
Sarah.
of course. You can find more by visiting the home of the Unscripted podcast at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.